All right, join me on page 150 in the social studies textbook. If you don't have your textbook out now, please pause the video, get your textbook out so you can follow along. So look at the screen really quickly. I want you to notice this map that I have showing on the screen is very similar to the map that's on page 151 in your Go Math textbook. Notice this shows some of the cataracts. These are the waterfalls along the Nile River. Notice you don't have any of the cataracts along Lower Egypt or really even Upper Egypt. They go much further back along the Nile because these areas would have been hard to trade through, right? Because it's going to be hard to sail a boat up a waterfall or down a waterfall coming back. So most of the activity is along this area, but you can see the Middle Kingdom starts to now stretch back past these waterfalls, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. Follow along on page 150, the Middle Kingdom. You are there. The year is 1900 BC, and you are proud to be an Egyptian. Egypt is united again under powerful leaders. They have defeated Egypt's enemies and built fortresses along the borders to guarantee that Egypt will never be threatened again. Valuable goods flow into Egypt's cities from other lands. Old irrigation systems have been repaired, and new ones are being built. New temples and pyramids rise from the sands just as precious crops rise from the Nile's fertile banks. So it seems life is good right now. Okay, page 151, Reuniting the Kingdom. At the end of the Old Kingdom, in about 2181 BC, Egypt fell into civil war, or war between two groups in the same place. At about the same time, a long drought set in. Farmland dried up and crops failed. Famines, or food shortages, plagued the war-torn country. No longer united by one king, Egyptian nobles fought one another for power. A scribe named Nefertiti, again, I'm probably butchering these names, described these troubled times. One can cross the water, the Nile, on foot. The land is in sickness. One will take up weapons of warfare, a son as an enemy, a brother as a foe. So when he's talking about crossing the Nile on foot, he's talking about the drought. He's saying basically there's so little water, you can just walk right across the Nile. When in the past we know that it's flooded, things like that. It's a huge river normally, but he's saying, look, the drought is so bad, we have so little water, you can just walk across the Nile now. Okay, continuing in your text. Egypt reunited in about 2040 BC. That year marks the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a time of stability and growth that lasted until about 1786 BC. The rule of Dynasty 12 is considered the high point of this period. The dynasty started in about 1991 BC, when a vizier named Amenemhet from Lower Egypt became king. He and those who ruled after him conquered all of northern Nubia. They set up a chain of forts to protect the region. Along their northeastern border, the Egyptians built the Walls of the Prince, a series of forts to protect the Nile Delta. The rulers of Dynasty 12 undertook massive building projects. To help secure water for food crops, they built more irrigation canals. To honor the dead, they built temples and pyramids. They also built an elaborate temple, now known as Labyrinth, that was said to have had 3,000 rooms connected by a maze of hallways. The Middle Kingdom was also a time of advances in art and literature. Egyptian artists revived the wall painting style of the Old Kingdom and began crafting the finest jewelry ever made in Egypt. Writers of the time produced Egypt's earliest literature. Middle Kingdom literature included not only religious writings, but also writings about everyday life. For example, Middle Kingdom writers provided guidelines for living in society. Okay, turning the page. Now we're on page 152. Follow along. Start at the top. Trade. So in this section, we're going to learn all about trade. And if you have any questions that ask something about trade, this is the page you're going to want to go back to find the answer. Okay, follow along. Trade with other regions increased during the Middle Kingdom. Caravans and ships carried goods between Egypt and parts of southwestern Asia, Eastern Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean region. Egypt had plenty of resources of its own to trade, especially grains. It also was rich in valuable minerals and semi-precious stones. However, Egypt lacked some important resources, such as wood for building and copper for metalworking. Caravans brought silver from Syria and copper and turquoise from the Sinai Peninsula. Ships sailing from what is now Lebanon brought cedar and pine wood. Gold, ebony, ivory, and incense came to Egypt through the trade with southern Nubia. Whether by land or by sea, trade could be difficult and dangerous. Caravans moved slowly along desert routes, traveling only about 10 miles a day. Overland traders often faced robbers and sandstorms on their long journeys. Trade by sea was faster, but pirates were a danger. Sea traders also had to brave strong winds and rough waves during the winter months. Although difficult and risky, trade brought much wealth to those who could overcome its dangers. Even in ancient times, a trader needed to do a cost-benefit analysis to decide whether to carry out trade. In this kind of study, a person tries to determine whether the economic benefit of doing something makes it worth the risk. So, cost-benefit analysis. Let me see what example I can give for you guys. And cost benefit, I'm going to use it in a sports term. For example, in basketball right now, using analytics, basically looking at statistics and numbers and probabilities, is very popular right now in basketball, professional basketball. And it's kind of based on the same idea of a cost-benefit analysis. And so what the cost-benefit analysis says is, hey, in basketball, shooting a three-pointer at 33%, because a three-pointer is worth 3 points. So if you make 1 out of 3, you're shooting 33%. That would be equivalent to shooting 50% on a two-pointer. So they figure the benefit of shooting a 3 as opposed to shooting a mid-jumper is much higher. So now, for example, if you look at the Houston Rockets, they almost exclusively, they shoot either a 3 or they try to shoot a shot inside of the paint, because they've decided that there isn't a very good benefit for shooting a shot that is in between a three-pointer and inside the paint. So they did a cost-benefit analysis and said, hey, let's stop shooting these two-pointers that aren't layups or dunks and shoot threes instead, because it gives us more of an advantage. So these traders would have to look and say, okay, how much money am I going to make from selling all this stuff on my boat? If it's not enough money, it's not worth the risk of being captured by pirates or having all my goods stolen. So they would only go if it was worth it, basically if it was worth the risk. Okay. All right, page 153, a time of invasion. Follow along in your text. After Dynasty 12, Egypt faced attacks from invaders. At first, Egypt remained united, but the government was weak. As many as 70 kings ruled during Dynasty 13. Also at this time, large groups of people from southwestern Asia crossed into Egypt by way of the Sinai Peninsula. Over time, these peoples settled in the area around the northeastern Nile Delta. The Egyptians called the people the Hyksos, meaning rulers of foreign lands. The Hyksos brought about the end of the Middle Kingdom and tore Egypt apart. The Hyksos had superior military technology. They fought from horse-drawn chariots, wore body armor, and used a stronger kind of bow. Without armor, the Egyptian foot soldiers were no match for the Hyksos. In about 1640 BC, the Hyksos conquered Lower Egypt. Hyksos kings ruled Lower Egypt for about 100 years and established Dynasty 15. Egyptian rulers remained in power only in Upper Egypt. The time of the Hyksos brought important cultural exchanges in Egypt. Besides superior weapons, the Hyksos introduced horses, upright looms, and new musical instruments, the lyre and the lute. Okay, let's look at the map below on page 152 and 153. It stretches across the whole page. And this map is looking at Egyptian trade. Notice there's a key on the bottom right-hand corner of page 153. So the shaded in brown area is the area of the Middle Kingdom. The palm trees represent oasis. The black dots represent different cities. The solid black line represents land trade route, and the white line that's over the oceans and seas represents water trade routes. Okay, starting at the left and working my way right, let's look at the first caption. It says, fine pottery represented just some of the items that the Nubians offered for trade, and there's an example of some of that pottery. The Phoenicians of southwestern Asia traded such goods as this duck container, and then vases so now I'm on page 153. Vases like this were traded by people living in Mesopotamia. And then analyze illustrations, number 7. It says, this physical map shows the part of Earth where the continents of Africa, Europe, and Asia meet. The water on the far left part of the map is the Mediterranean Sea. Flowing into the Mediterranean is the winding Nile River. Long ago, the ancient Egyptians used both water and land routes to trade with other people. All right, thanks again for watching and following along. If you have any questions as you listen through, now's a good time to ask. And you can now go back to your social studies assignment in your Google Classroom. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.